The Gospel this Sunday comes from John chapter 4, the story of the meeting of Jesus with the Samaritan woman. Frequently, the Gospel focuses on the woman's morality, or lack of. The fact that she comes in the middle of the day, not in the morning with the other women. That she has 5 or even 6 husbands. Surely she must be. Now, such interpretations are nonsense. They miss the whole point of what John is revealing in this scene. Firstly, the scene is in chapter 4, and to understand it, you need to know important information from earlier chapters, particularly chapter 2. In chapter 2, Jesus is at a wedding at Cana, and as you know, he provides abundant, top-quality wine. And have you noticed that the steward in charge of the wedding, who doesn't know about Jesus, he goes to the bridegroom to congratulate him for saving the best wine till last. Now, this tells us that it was the responsibility of the bridegroom to provide the wine. The whole point of the scene is to reveal that the bridegroom is really Jesus. In the Old Testament, the bridegroom was an image for God, and the wedding symbolized God's committed, loving relationship to Israel. In John, Jesus will be the revealer of God and God's desire to be in relationship with all of us. After Cana, the next story in chapter 2 is Jesus in the temple, driving out the animals, turning over the tables, and saying to those who challenge him, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And the author then adds that Jesus was speaking of the temple of his body. So from now on in John, Jesus is a living temple. He is now the place where God dwells. Now, these important clues from John 2 are needed to understand what happens in John 4, in the meeting between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. One other important piece of information that we need, that John's community wouldn't need, is the religious difference between Jesus, who's a Judean, and the woman, who's a Samaritan. You see, originally there was only one kingdom, under David and then under his son Solomon. But after the death of Solomon, one of his sons and the tribes associated with him did not want to have a hereditary monarchy. They wanted to choose their own king. So the tribes in the north split from the tribes in the south. The northern group established their capital in Samaria, and the southern group stayed with the line of David and kept their capital as Jerusalem. So with that background, which we wouldn't be aware of, but John's community would, let's go back again to John 4. Oh, forgot to add. Once the kingdom was split into the north and south, then we have a more powerful nation, Assyria, coming down and capturing the northern kingdom, that's the Samaria group. And what they did, they brought in people from other foreign nations that they'd also captured. And it brought about a mingling of the people in the north, the Israel group, and the foreigners. And that mixture became known as the Samaritans, and they were despised by the southern group. They were despised because they were looked on as having impure or mixed blood. Now back to John. Notice how often Jacob's name is mentioned. It's Jacob's well. It's near land that Jacob owned. Now, this is a clue. Another clue is that the meeting took place at a well and in the middle of the day. Now, John's original audience would understand all these clues because they know the scriptures. They know the story of Jacob, and that's what I need to turn to. In Genesis 29, Jacob travels to relatives in order to find a wife. He comes to a well. He finds shepherds there. And Jacob is puzzled because they gather at a well in the middle of the day. As he says, "Behold, it is still high day. It's not time for the animals to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and pasture them." But then another shepherd arrives. While he was still speaking, Rachel came with her father's sheep. Now when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of his mother's brother Laban. Eventually, Jacob meets his father, Rachel's father, and they marry. What we have in this scene is what's called a type scene. Boy meets girl at the local, in this case a well. And in the Old Testament, a well is where Isaac meets his wife, Rebekah. Jacob meets Rachel, and Moses will meet Zipporah in Exodus. So it's a very typical scene, the meeting of a man and woman at a well, leading to a union, a marriage. Now, the introduction in John sets us up for the later discussion about marriage. The first thing that happens is almost hostility. This is a woman of Samaria, and she says, "How can you, a Judean, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Centuries of division between the north and southern kingdoms create this hard-hearted division. And in response, Jesus says, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Now remember, Jesus is the living temple of God's water. And in Jewish theology, the temple was seated directly above all the waters of creation. And that's why Jesus actually sits on the well, right above the waters. Now, we need more background on that. It's not all that obvious, as it would be for John's original community. And the background we see in Ezekiel chapter 47. "Then he brought me back to the temple, to the entrance of the temple, and there water was flowing from below the threshold of the temple toward the east. He led me back along the bank of the river. As I came back, I saw on the bank of the river a great many trees on the one side and on the other. He said to me, 'This water flows toward the eastern region, and when it enters the sea of stagnant waters, what we call the Dead Sea, the water will become fresh, because wherever the river goes, every living creature that swarms will live, because the water comes from the sanctuary.'" Keep in mind, Jesus, the new temple, he can be this source of living water. Well, naturally, the woman is very skeptical. How can he do this? In those days, she says to him, "Are you greater than our father Jacob?" And she points out, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where are you going to get that living water?" Here, almost the disdain and cynicism in her voice. "Where are you going to get water from? You've got nothing." And this is because our idea of a well looks something like this, where the bucket and the rope are all provided. But in the Middle East, even today, wells are just a hole in the ground. And if you want to get water from them, you bring your own bucket and your own rope. No wonder she says, "Sir, you've got no bucket. Are you greater than our father Jacob?" Notice another mention of Jacob. And this takes us back to looking at the story of Jacob and Rachel. You see, originally the story was written in Hebrew. But over time, the people in that land, meaning both the Judeans, Jesus, and the Samaritans, the language developed and they were speaking Aramaic. It's a bit like today in Italy. In the past, the people spoke Latin, but now they're speaking Italian, a related language, but not the same. So what happened in the land was that the Old Testament was translated into the language of the people, into Aramaic. And these were written down in scrolls that were called targums. Now, these targums were not a word-for-word exact translation. The translators elaborated on the story, added to them, made them even better. And so Jesus and the Samaritan woman would have heard the Jacob story like this. "When our father Jacob raised the stone from above the mouth of the well overflowed and came up to its mouth, and was overflowing for 20 years, all the days that he dwelt in Haran." See, Jacob didn't need a bucket. A miracle happened, and the water rose up to him, and it kept flowing for 20 years. This is why the woman says to Jesus, "Are you greater than our father Jacob?" In other words, can you provide water without needing a bucket? And Jesus' response is basically, yes. And what's more, I'm even greater than Jacob. Jacob's water lasted only 20 years. The water that I will give will become a spring of water gushing up to eternity life. Those who drink the water I will give will never be thirsty. Now the woman surrenders. "Sir, give me this water that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." So she's really changed her attitude from open hostility to politeness, to now requesting. And it's at this point that the dialogue changes to speak about husbands. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise. It is a meeting of a man and a woman at a well, and in the Old Testament, that always led towards marriage. And don't forget, Jesus has been revealed as the true bridegroom. But as we see in this passage, the woman reveals that she's had 5 husbands, and now Jesus says, "You have one who's not your husband," giving a total of 6. Now, please don't take this literally. In some Bible, in the Bible, some numbers have a symbolic value. So the number 7 is used to express completion or fullness. That's the number of days God needed for creation. If 7 means fullness, completion, 6 means almost there, but not quite. So the number 6 points ahead to something more to come, to a 7th. So the question is, who is the 7th husband? And of course, by now you know the answer. Jesus has been revealed as the bridegroom. He is there before her as the one who will bring completion, fullness to what this woman and her people are seeking. At this point, the woman expresses great insight. She recognizes that Jesus is a man of God. Sir, I see you are a prophet. And so she asks this prophet, where do I meet God? Our ancestors, that is, the Samaritans, we worshipped here on this mountain. But you Judeans, you say the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem. And at this point, Jesus shifts the discussion from temple buildings to the inner spirit. Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you'll worship the Father neither here on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Because worship means more than sacrificing animals and elaborate rituals. Worship demands a true inner spirit or integrity of spirit. Jesus says the hour is coming and is now here because I'm here. True worshippers will worship in spirit and truth because God is spirit, and those who worship must worship in spirit and truth. Now, a little point here. The Greek expression spirit and truth, that's how they write it. In fact, it means a true spirit, where true is an adjective describing the noun spirit. In Greek, they put it down as if it's 2 nouns, but joined by and. This woman's journey has come a long way, and now she recognizes Jesus as something more than even a prophet. She recognizes Jesus as one the whole of Israel, Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom, everyone has been waiting for. I know the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. And when he comes, he'll proclaim all things to us. And Jesus said to her, Ego eimi, I am the one who is speaking to you. Now this expression, Ego eimi, I am, is the very name of God. It's the name that was revealed to Moses back in Exodus 3, when Moses asked God, what is your name? So I can tell the people who spoke to me in the burning bush. So Jesus here is uniting himself with Ego eimi, with the I am of Israel. This is phenomenal. This is the first time in John's Gospel that Jesus has revealed his deepest self, his union with God, that he is the God of Israel. And it happens here, at a well, in a rich theological dialogue with a woman. Now, following this scene, the woman leaves her jar. She doesn't need it any longer. She's found a source of living water. And she acts like Jesus, dare I say in persona Christi, because she says to her people, come and see. And those are the same words Jesus said when he met his disciples. When some of the followers of John asked, where do you dwell? He said, come and see. And now the woman does the same. Not only does she act like Jesus, she acts as an apostle. as announcing to her village all that she has learnt, what has happened to her, who she has found, her experience. And now I come to what this whole episode is all about. You see, this episode enacts the union of Judeans, Jesus, and Samaritans with God. We see when the Samaritans come to Jesus, they ask him to dwell with them. And he dwelt there 2 days. And many more believe because of his word. And I've highlighted the word to dwell. And in order to understand that deeper meaning that John is getting to, once again we need to turn to the Old Testament, to scriptures John's community would have known very well and recognised in this scene. We go to Ezekiel chapter 37. Ezekiel says to the people, "Thus says the Lord God, I will take the people of Israel, the Samaritans, from the nations among which they have gone. I will gather them from every quarter and bring them to their own land. I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel. Never again shall they be divided, shall they be 2 nations. Never again shall they be divided into 2 kingdoms. Then they shall be my people, and I will be their God." So in the union of the people, they're reformed into God's covenant people. "And my servant David shall be king over them. They'll have one shepherd. I will make a covenant of peace with them, an everlasting covenant. I will bless them and multiply them, and I will set my sanctuary among them forevermore. My dwelling place shall be with them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people." Hear the language, my dwelling place shall be with them. You see, this is what the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman brings about. Jesus is acting as the great bridegroom, the temple of God's presence, joining Judah and Samaria. In the Old Testament, marriage was seen as the symbol of God's covenant with Israel. And in John's community, this becomes a reality. Jesus, the divine bridegroom, meets Judah and a woman of Samaria, and John's community would be a community of Samaritans, Jews, and Gentiles, with Jesus dwelling in their midst. Jesus, a living temple. That's the background of John 4. That's what it's about. That's what it would have meant to the people of John's community who first heard it. But now, what about us? What do we hear? Where are we in this story? I suggest that we look at what happens to the woman, how she moves from anger and hostility. "You, a Judean, ask a drink of me, a Samaritan." She moves to cynicism. "Where are you going to get that water? Are you greater than our father Jacob?" To doubt. Can it be? And finally, to faith, where after wondering, could this be the Messiah, she goes to her villagers with faith in her experience. I think Catholic women today experience all of these emotions as we try and grapple with this church we are part of. We know these I know these experiences, and I think possibly many other women do too. Anger, disillusionment, doubt, disappointment, cynicism. Are we able to hear Jesus and hear that faith is more than buildings, more than rituals, that faith calls for a deep spiritual integrity, what's called in the gospel a true spirit? Can we allow Jesus into all our emotional upheavals as Catholic women and travel the journey of the Samaritan woman? Now, I want to conclude with a song by Professor Maeve Heaney. And also speak of this book she wrote, Suspended God, Music and a Theology of Doubt, because this story, we move through anger and doubt to faith. And in this book, Maeve examines the lives of a number of theologians, such as Teresa of Avila, Karl Rahner, Sandra Schneiders, Elizabeth Johnson, Bonhoeffer. And she looks at the way that their life and their writings focus on what they have experienced of God. Their theology emerges out of their life experience. And she keeps saying, all theology is biography. The words are at the end of every chapter, and also a link to where you can listen to them on her website. So this is Maeve's song.
I am, you are, nameless, claimless still. You are, I am, shameless, faceless, if only you knew. You interrupt her and she interrupts you right back. You were tired, it was the 6th hour, the time and the place for eternity, life to make sense, the right kind of space for a scene. What is she doing here? Rabbi, you've got to eat. How dare you speak to me? How dare you cross the line that was drawn and still drawn? Give me something to drink. I am tired. It is the 6th hour, 'cause I am, you are, nameless, claimless still. Believe me that you are, I am, shameless, faceless, if only you knew. You have no bucket, she cut through the small talk and called you to honor an overdue covenant. One of those conversations that mark a world, one of those rare occasions where time stands still, and the truth that was claimed as their two worlds collide and change shape. If she's more than a match for your mind, she can find her way through all the clues to your truth and your power, for now is the hour of I am, you are, nameless, claimless still. Believe me that you are, I am, shameless, faceless, if only you knew it.
The song was written by Maeve to honour the work of Sandra Schneider's, particularly the work she did on John 4 and her interpretation. But now, the questions I left you with. Can we allow Jesus to be the I am for us? Can we move to worship that looks beyond fixed places and certain rituals? Can we invite Jesus to dwell with us? Thank you.